Well, the New York Giants have lost 10 in a row for the first time in their franchise history. And we're going to talk about it in multiple aspects. Probably not as much game aspects, probably big picture stuff, because at this point in the season, that's really all you can talk about. And I know that the past few weeks has been mostly big picture shit, but there's different sectors that we could still go over here on this show. But you're talking about a game where the Giants once again got blown out 34 to 7. I mean, last week was 35 to 7 or 35-14. But talking about the game, this sector did good, this sector did bad. Like breaking that down is meaningless at this point. It's just not there, right? And I'm pretty sure for you guys it would be meaningless too, because why would I give you my analysis on a game that didn't mean shit? For the Falcons, listen, Falcon fans, you guys are still in the playoff race, and you guys needed this win more than we did, so congratulations on that, Falcon fans, and thank you for handing us this moral victory of a number one overall pick. But we thank, it goes both ways, right? You guys get the win. We get the number one overall pick as of right now. There's multiple ways this could go. Giants could win their next two. Giants could lose their next two. They could split 1-1. However that could go. But I haven't started my intro yet, so welcome to the Big Blue in the Bronx podcast, everybody. Like, comment, subscribe, turn on post notifications so you know when a live stream pops video drops. Appreciate you coming back, share this out. Before I get this started, hope you guys do have happy holidays, Merry Christmas, whatever you celebrate. Obviously, we'll have, I think, two more shows. I think, because the 29th is a Sunday. So we're actually going to have a show on New Year's Eve, I think. Yeah, we're going to have a show on New Year's Eve, because that's going to be, quote-unquote, recapping the Colts game. We're going to have a preview pod for the Colts game. I'm going to try to reach out to a couple guys within the few days. And also on Sunday, we're going to have a end of the year stream. Last year, what we did was we all got together and bought each other prank gifts. So that's going to happen again this year. Where Brian gets me a prank gift with Luca, and it all goes around. So it's a lot of fun, and we're going to invite some callers on because we need to let the Jet fans stress their shit out, and the Giants fans talk about how terrible the team is. So that's what we're going to do. But just a couple of channel updates, of course. And please hit the like button, subscribe to all the good stuff. We're trying to put up more content. Obviously, the Yankees offseason isn't completely over, hopefully. Even though it's been fast but slow. I just feel like that. Every once in a couple of days you'll get a move or something like that. So, the New York Giants, right? They have lost 10 games in a row for the first time in franchise history. Now, I think when Mara was shown on the TV for Fox, Daryl Johnston and Kevin Kugler called the game. I think when the game showed them, I think Mara saw it maybe on another TV or a peripheral vision, or maybe his brother, Chris Mara, said, John, you're being shown on the TV, and then he walked away. But you really can't make a decision on the franchise based on these last two games. Maybe you could make a decision based on this game. I really don't think so. Because you look at, the last few games, obviously when they got rid of Daniel Jones, it went downhill. But at the same time, it's not like he did anything for you anyway, like too much. Like he was, he put you more competitive into games. But after that, I mean, it's just, it's not a watchable product. 35-14, 14-11, 27-20. Like probably after the, I would say Bucks game when you got completely blown out in your own building off of a bye, that probably gives you the signal of like these guys should not have a job next year. The Ravens game was probably another enforcer of that. But at that point, the Falcons game should not have even been something to put into Mara's mind like, hey, this is the game that they made their bones on, and they're not coming back next year. Those games beforehand really should have decided that. I mean, the Eagles 28-3 game was pretty awful, but they scored points the next 2 weeks. I guess that's what they're taking out of a moral victory or some shit like that. So again, it comes to a redundant talking point of why should these guys be back next year? And Dable, I'm not worried about. Because in terms of that, I know he's going to get fired. I think he's going to get fired, and there's just no way he's going to save his job at this point. I don't think, again, going back to my other talking point, any of these games can really do any convincing. But as far as Joe Shane goes, I mean, another redundant talking point is, hey, you wouldn't have this record. And, I can't really buy myself into the talking point that the Giants are tanking because the Giants are just still bad, right? Jalen Hyatt's not getting involved. If it is, it's minimal. And that was even a thing at the beginning of the season. So it's not something like it drastically changed. Drew Lock, he stinks. We know that, right? Drew Lock stinks. Tim Boyle stinks. Tommy DeVito stinks. That's the quarterback room you chose. I mean, Tim Boyle was signed off the street. He was probably on another practice squad or doing something or whatever he was. Tommy DeVito, you kept because, hey, listen, we're going to keep the star of last year's show towards the end of the year and, God forbid, ticket sales go down few because we didn't keep Tommy DeVito for the locals or God knows what the scenario would have been. And then, we signed Drew Lock for $5 million, so we have to play him, even though he's still kind of god-awful. And I think if they chose best quarterback over investments, they'd probably start Tim Boyle. Now, that would be sad, again, because it's like, okay, Tommy DeVito put to the side, Drew Lock, $5 million you put into him and all the incentives, you have to start him. But, again, this comes down to investments. This comes down to best player available, I guess, at this point, and it's not a meritocracy. So that's where really that goes. And in certain ways, over the last 2 years especially, the Giants have not really written themselves as a meritocracy. But again, it goes full circle every single week that this roster is just simply not good enough. The investments are simply not good enough. The depth is simply not good enough. You're signing guys off the street. I mean, Bobby O is on IR. Dex is on IR. This guy's on IR. John Runyon's on IR. Somewhat understandable. Right? You have injuries that could happen and all these other different things. But when you really get down to it, this is going to sound shitty. But good depth and bad depth make a difference. And when injuries happen, there's a difference between being a team that's like 6-7 wins compared to a team that's like 3 wins, 2 wins, 4 wins. Because that's when your depth really sticks out in a bad way. And then 6-7 wins is coaching props it up, and you have to give the coach props. And the GM probably did good with the depth, even though you guys, didn't want to go where you were. That's the staunch difference. And the staunch difference is shown here where the Giants don't have good depth. They don't have even, obviously players like Corey Durden and some of the guys like Raheem Lane signed off the street. They're not going to go out there and just say, I'm just going to go through the motions. No, they're playing for a job on another NFL roster next year because they know they're not going to be signed by the New York Giants unless it's for the preseason, however long that contract spans. But you still got some guys they invested in not really playing well. I mean, listen, this Falcons offense, we're going to go talk about the pass rush another time. I'm not going to really get into that. But something I want to go over is this. It's a common debate in Giant land, and we could value all the options and all these other different things. Now, it's only one game. And I really didn't bring this up in the preview pod because I really didn't feel it was essential. The debate point I'm going to bring up is some people on social media, they wanted Michael Penix, they wanted Bo Nix, they wanted a quarterback over Malik Nabers. Now, at the time, I said if Drake May were to fall or Michael Penix were to still be there, I wasn't a big fan of Bo Nix. But if any of those two guys were still to be there, right, what would happen? I would want a quarterback. Penix was still there. Drake May wasn't. What happened? Well, you saw what happened. Giants selected Malik Nabers. I'm not going to sit here and say that there's Malik Neighbors in every draft. There's still good wide receivers in every draft that are 1,000 worthy if you coach them up correctly. But it's not just, oh, well, the right now. It's also big picture and how it affects people's jobs. Because Malik Neighbors, that kind of cemented, and also you have to look at the surrounding things, right? You have to look at the surrounding pieces that, huddled around your draft pick. And sometimes it tells you where you want to go. Now, of course, some teams do draft quarterbacks and they have good free agencies and they sign in free agency and they just throw money at the wall and, see what sticks. But they signed Brian Burns. Signed Brian Burns to an extension if they traded for him. So that tells you that, okay, it's not really a rebuild. Like, people started getting the hint a little bit. Oh, shit, we're going to try to do this competitive nonsense again and run it back with Daniel Jones. So there's that. And even then, like, if you did trade up to 3 and go get Drake May, right? If you did do that, it would still be a bad investment in Brian Burns because you're trying to, quote-unquote, expedite the process. You're competing while you're rebuilding, which really doesn't happen. Like, if you get the quarterback and you have, like, a decent roster, like, you don't have this great roster, but you have a decent roster, you have your draft picks, you don't have too many free agent signings, you will end up winning some games because the first part of the season you'll likely be not a good team, right? You'll probably have like 1-7 or 2-8 or 1-8, something like that. You'll probably have that span of wins losses, and then your team will find your footing down the stretch. I look at now. This is not a great example, but I remember when Ryan Fitzpatrick and Josh Rosen were the quarterbacks of Miami, and Fitzpatrick had them down the stretch winning football games that they had no business winning. But the coaching from Brian Flores, just as a team, and that's why a lot of people want him. Personally, I don't want him. I mean, that's going to be, in a separate video. But that's why a lot of people are like, oh yeah, I want Brian Flores because he took this team that was giving up 100 points within the first 2 games, and players wanted trades and shit like that. And guess what? Down the stretch, we won it with a bunch of schmucks and a bunch of young guys. So that's the route that they could have went. The Giants didn't go that route, of course, but they signed Brian Burns after trading for him. They signed Illuminor, which you probably, you could have done anyway. I mean, he's got, a 2-year deal. That doesn't really indicate you win now. It just means you're securing the offensive line for whoever's a quarterback. John Runyon, you could kind of argue it was sort of a free agent win now move because, I mean, rebuilding teams sometimes, again, don't make those moves, but you could argue, hey, listen, Robert Hunt, $20 million over in Carolina annually, Damian Lewis signed for what he did, and that Panthers O-line is kicking ass right now. So you could actually argue that, and they've done well with a number of injuries at the center position, which really is a staunch difference from the Giants. I mean, not so staunch, I should say, but they, they're noticed around the league. The Giants aren't, because the Giants, were expected to do a lot of things, and when the Giants were expected to do a lot of things and they failed, what happened is all the eyes went away. And they started looking at other teams, like teams that were under the radar. The Giants were not under the radar. The Giants were projected because they got Malik Neighbors, because they traded for Brian Burns. They were expected to do all these different things, win 9-10 games, try to sneak into a wild card again. And they didn't do that, right? So nobody really gives them the respect, and they don't deserve the respect. Let's be honest, right? They don't deserve the respect. And I know I'm going on 7 different fucking tangents here, but let's look at it down the middle. Malik Neighbors, you draft him. Personally, me, and even Joe Shane said it, so it's not even just me. You got Daniel Jones a weapon. He said it in Hard Knocks. He said, we're going to get Daniel a weapon. And that weapon happened to be Malik Neighbors. And they didn't look close enough, at least in my opinion, of maybe the quarterback class, because personally, I would have rather fallen in love with Michael Penix than Bo Nix. I went over that. But looking at the span and how much time you buy yourself, because you can never get back time. Neighbors, if you fail, right, you gotta always look at the worst case scenario. Sometimes, you do have to prepare for the best case scenario, but you gotta look at the worst case scenario, right? If you fail with Michael Penix in year one and you win 3 to 5 games, the criticism is there. But it's not as there as if it would be if you drafted a Malik Neighbors or a Brock Bowers. Because you could sit behind the excuse of, hey, listen, it's just a rebuilding year. We're, letting contracts end. We're trading guys. We're doing our thing. We're using draft assets on a good class. Whatever. You buy yourself time that way. Right? That's sitting down with yourself and your front office and your team and saying, we know our roster is full of holes. We know our roster is bad. So, getting a quarterback, right? And even if you want to say, oh, well, the Giants passed on Bo Nix and they shouldn't have, I'll let you have your opinion. But if you take a quarterback, and I'm not talking second round, I'm talking first round quarterback at 6, or maybe you trade down a little bit to get some picks, whatever. If you do that, maybe McCarthy too, but again, back to the point. If you do that, you buy yourself at least another 2 years, which, let's see, could almost last your contract. Because year one, right, you already got the first 2 years. You had your playoff year, you had your shit year, your 6-11 year. The first year of the quote-unquote, we're going to go down and rebuild, which a lot of people, again, they were angry about the Giants not doing a couple of things right, signing Daniel Jones, and rightfully so. So, you have year one, you have year two, and you have year three. And that's really the end of your contract, because year three, you could be in a Jerry Jones position and not extend him. Like, Mara, if we were in that position, I would have just said over the rooftops, do not extend these guys until they show you that this is sustained success. Because you don't sign them, oh, yeah, we're going to give them a 3-year extension, and then they just shit the bed the next year. So, number 1 year is probably, you get Penix, you use your assets somewhere else, and you, let's say, I don't know, get 3 to 6 wins. Now, obviously, the Falcons roster was built differently. They're in a different position. They kind of took the route that the Giants took in some ways, right? Because this is the year. Obviously, the Giants, have a veteran quarterback, or had a veteran quarterback in Daniel Jones, but they also drafted Michael Penix, which is like a contingency plan. But for the first game it worked. We'll see if it works long term. But they had Desmond Ridder in 21. In 22 and 23, and it didn't work out. Or Ridder was in 22, I don't remember. I think Ryan was in 21, Ridder was in 22, and they had Ridder in 2023 again with Taylor Heineke, and that didn't work. So, Arthur Smith gets fired because of his horrible offense, and now you're just trying to... It's, as I said, it's sort of different because you're buying yourself time with this quarterback thing, though you have the bad investment in Kirk Cousins. So... if this team gets you to the playoffs, a wild card or something like that with Penix, you're not putting your ass by the fire. If they were to shit the bed this season and, they didn't win all these different games, then your ass would be by the fire. But going back to the Giants' point is the first year you win 3 to 6 games. The next year, you start trading guys, you pile on some draft picks. That's where you should be middle. Probably between the 6 to 9 win range. Based on your coaching, based on the talent you've acquired. Personally, I was speaking to somebody over the phone about it. Actually, I'm going to get into it when we talk about the number 1 pick. And which will be like, obviously it's not secured that we have the number 1 pick because the Giants could still win games, shit could still happen, but nonetheless. You win 3 to 6 wins year 1. Year 2, 6 to 9. By year 3, you probably should be a contender, something between 8 to 11, maybe 12 wins. And this is like a decent timeline because you look at model teams around the league, teams that have turned it around in year 1. I mean, Washington, they had a skimpy little win over Philadelphia. Talk about the false start call you want, but Lane Johnson does that on the weekly. that's a team that could be DeMeco Ryan, C.J. Stroud-esque. It's possible, very much so. So you have that. Again, we reference the Texans. They turned it out around in 1 year. Do they take a little bit of a drop off? Yeah, but they're still in it, right? They're still in it for the playoffs. And that division is shit anyway. I mean, the Jaguars are shit, the Colts are mid, and the Titans are shit. So, the 49ers, I mean, let's see, 2017, 2018, 2019, they were back in the Super Bowl. 2017 with Kyle Shanahan, they were a complete train wreck. And, we could all talk about Jimmy G, how good or bad he was. They started C.J. Beathard. He won a few games, and then they switched over to Jimmy G, won a few games. 2018 is where Jimmy G gets hurt. They have Nick Mullins, who was pretty much like a Tommy DeVito story after they beat the shit out of the Raiders. I think it was on Monday Night Football. And then 2019, with Jimmy G, they build up that roster. They're in the Super Bowl, right? Because the coaching is so much there. And of course, we could argue, so much about the 49ers being NFC chip or bust. But, they've had more success than the Giants. Another example, which seems like we have a lot of examples, Detroit. Year one, you trade Stafford away to LA for Jared Goff. Quarterback trade, picks in there as well. They win something like 3 games. And, people look at Campbell, oh, he's a laughingstock, oh, the kneecaps coming, all this sort of shit, right? And then, year 2 comes around, they knock Aaron Rodgers out of the playoffs in his final year with the Green Bay Packers, and they go on this huge winning streak towards the end, which they also beat the New York Giants, which was kind of like the slowdown of the Giants from that season. So, I'm going to reference it right now, 2022. They start off 1-5, 1-6, and they end the season 9-8. Win against Green Bay, win against Chicago, win against New York, loss against Buffalo, win against Jacksonville, win against Minnesota, win against the Jets, win against Carolina, win against Chicago, and then in Green Bay on Sunday Night Football, 20-16. They don't make the playoffs because I think Seattle won or something like that, and they edged in. But they were able to play spoiler and say, if we're not going to the playoffs, Green Bay's not either. And then the next year, they make it to the NFC Championship game. Jameson Williams, all these other different assets, and they're building through the draft. You guys noticed that. They've made reinforcements on the offensive line. I mean, obviously, they got Graham Glasgow back. Frank Ragnow has been there for years. Taylor Decker's there. Penei Sewell was a home run pick. And you know what? I'll leave that for later because I keep hindering my mind with the pass rush. But Amon-Ra St. Brown, 3rd round pick. Jameson Williams, he's looking real good right now. Sam Laporta, obviously, coming from last year and stuff like that. Like, these picks are what's really sending them over the edge. I mean, yeah, for this year they did trade for Zadarius Smith, but Aiden Hutchinson, second overall pick, and he's living up to the hype. Obviously, he's on the injured reserve now, which isn't great. And their defense, yeah, is still shaky, but they're also one of the best teams in the league. They have one of the best offenses. They have one of the best offensive coordinators who will probably be getting a job this offseason. So, through all of that, I'm just giving you guys a tour of how much it doesn't take 5 years in the NFL to rebuild anymore. If you have a competent GM, if you have a competent head coach who are tight-knit, in cahoots about a plan to build a team properly, it will take 3 years for you to be a contender again. Not 5 years, not this, not that. Get the cap situation in order, trade players, assets, all that other shit. That's what I gotta say on that. So, for the final, cut down of this debate, I'm not gonna say how I feel because I really don't know. I love watching Neighbors and I think he's gonna be special, but Michael Penix and the quarterback thing, it would have bought these guys another 2 years. That's why they have to look at it more than I can look at it and more than I have to, really, because I'm just being a judge from the outside. But at the end of the day, if the coaching is this bad and the roster is this bad, that still shows their incompetence. Like you take Penix for example, you take Knicks, whoever, and if the roster still around him is still this bad, and like we start to see, oh shit, we picked a quarterback, but these guys aren't it in the front office and coaching staff, then that's where you're fucked too. So lose-lose situation if you're as competent as they show on the field right now. So that's like where I'm going to cut the umbilical cord of this debate. So we went over first thoughts. We went over the 10-game losing streak. We went over Neighbors over Penix. Though I will say, I love to see that Malik Neighbors is inching his way to 1,000 yards. He's got 31 left, and I think next 2 games is plenty enough to get 1,000 yards, which would be the first 1,000-yard receiver since Odell Beckham Jr. in 2018 with Eli Manning and all those other different cats on the team and Saquon Barkley too. And listen, of course, this draft class seems mostly like home runs. But again, I can't forgive the first 2 draft classes from Joe Schoen. So when a quarterback comes in here, hopefully next year, Neighbors will be a much better player. Though people seem to debate whether he's QB proof or not. Like, it's kind of like that Garrett Wilson debate. Like, some people are like, Garrett Wilson's a 1B receiver. And some people are like, Garrett Wilson's a 1A receiver if he has a quarterback, right? Because before, it was, well, Zach Wilson and Tim Boyle, the quarterbacks. And now it's Aaron Rodgers chooses not to throw to him because he throws to Devontae Adams. So, again, that's where they might trade Garrett Wilson to another spot. Another spot in the NFL, and maybe he becomes a great receiver, or he becomes just like a fringe guy, like a fringe 1B receiver or a 2A. That's what I don't want to happen to Malik Neighbors, because I think he's got some really good talent. Nothing to take away from Garrett Wilson, but if you get this guy the quarterback, we can see the potential. And of course, the rookie quarterback will struggle, but we can see the potential that Neighbors has to a full throttle extent. Because it's always great achievements, right? Garrett Wilson and Neighbors combined. When you arch your way to 1,000 with no competent quarterback play, can you hit the big time? Can you hit 1,200, 1,300 with a competent quarterback? So that's where I am. But happy for Malik Neighbors. Statistically, I am. In the case of, I'm not excited watching him play because the quarterback play is so bad. If it was Eli Manning or Daniel Jones in, his rookie year, that's exciting offense. This is just bullshit, boring offense where they're just putting up stats, and that's it. And I'm not going to piss on Malik Neighbors for putting up stats because he's a rookie. He should make his bread. I do want to talk about something real quickly that has creeped back in my mind, and it's made its way into my mind over the last few minutes as we get into this. So the Giants' pass rush didn't get any sacks on Michael Penix. And Penix is affected by pressure, and they did try to blitz a few times, but he was merely, his keywords, affected. Penix sacked no times, but he was hit twice. Once by Kayvon Thibodeau and once by Darius Muasau. There's a debate of who you should be more mad at. Obviously, you got to be mad at Joe Schoen. You got to be mad at him because these are his investments. Yes, 2 high investments. You trade a second and a fifth, and you spend a first-round pick. That's where that goes. Now, people say to me, oh, well, Kayvon was the obvious pick. He was the obvious pick at that pick. Why are you shitting on Joe Schoen? Why are you shitting on him for making the obvious pick? You would have picked him. You were excited when you picked him. First of all, it doesn't matter what I think because I'm a fan and a content creator at that. I call out the team when they make mistakes, but I'm also not in the GM room. I'm not with Brandon Brown, Tim McDonald, Chris Rossetti, and all those guys. But funny enough, right? That's such a loser mentality to take. That's a loser avenue to take. You know why? I don't know. It seems like Aiden Hutchinson is working out as the second overall pick, but despite him being injured, he was holding up his side of the aisle. I don't know how Trayvon Walker's doing. I'm not going to speak on that. Penei Sewell, right? Some people say, well, that wasn't the obvious pick. I mean, it still worked, right? It still works. That offensive line is one of the best in the NFL. He's one of the best right tackles in the NFL. And they have a good foundation. Sauce Gardner, I mean, that's a little different. But I'm trying to, think logically here. Sure, it could be the obvious pick. Oh, you would have picked Evan Neal. Oh, you didn't know that, Evan Neal would turn out the way he is. First of all, again, I'm not the GM. And I'm not a coach. So I can't evaluate these guys like they would. And I can't develop these guys because I'm not fucking there, right? So it's on the coaching staff to develop these guys. And it's on the GM for putting the investments in. You wouldn't need a Brian Burns if you had all of your value in Kayvon Thibodeau. If he was the player that... If he was a couple inches to the player that Aiden Hutchinson was, you don't need to trade a second and a fifth for Brian Burns. And that investment is even poor, right? Burns hasn't been horrible this season, right? He's got eight sacks, according to ESPN. Sometimes them and PFF can be off, so I always go to my friends at the Pro Football Reference. He's got 8 sacks this season, which is not terrible, right? It's not. If you look at the player he is, it's not terrible. He had 8 sacks last year. We got 2 games to go, and he had 9 sacks in 2020 and 2021. He was a Pro Bowler twice. So take out the investment. Okay, that's it's a solid package. But here's the problem. You did trade a second-round pick for him. You did trade a fifth-round pick for him. Stuff that could have been used on other assets. You could have drafted another pass rusher. You could have drafted an offensive lineman. I love this offensive line class. I love this defensive line class. But they opted to take nobody from the trenches. I mean, how's it looking now? The Giants' run defense is complete ass, right? You had no depth behind. They had 127 yards on the ground. I mean, Bijan had 4.3 yards per carry. He was being run a lot. Because, hey, why not? I mean, you're up 34-7 in the fourth quarter. They don't care. And they were running it even, towards the second, third quarter anyway. That's where he got his meat and his bones. But, Brian Burns, stats are good for what he is. The problem is that the Giants invested too much in him to where we have to expect higher. And we should expect higher because, again, you're getting paid almost $30 annually. Second and a fifth. He should be putting up 12 and a half sacks at least per season. Or at least 10. He hasn't done that. He's not a game wrecker. Kayvon Thibodeau is not a game wrecker. So, what do? You're tied to Burns for the next few years, so you're going to have to just sit it out and then cut him eventually when the time comes. That's going to be for the new GM because I feel like by that time Joe Shane's going to be fucking fired. And then for Kayvon Thibodeau, I said this, which could lead into my number 1 pick analysis. I would trade Kayvon Thibodeau. I would trade Bobby Okereke for whatever you could get. Kayvon Thibodeau, I don't want to say this because I feel like he's got more talent than this guy did coming out. I feel like Kayvon Thibodeau has the career arc of a better version of Dante Fowler. He's got 3 sacks this year. He's played in 10 games. He had 4 sacks his rookie year. Okay, we gave him a little cushion because, he was being held. Last year he had 11 and a half. I mean, those look like Dante Fowler numbers. Now, let's reference here. Fowler, I think, was 4th overall in his draft by the Jaguars. He was 3rd overall, so I'm close on that. Dante Fowler in his first 3 years in the NFL. 4 sacks, 8 sacks, 4 sacks. He didn't get 11 and a half till he left Jacksonville. He went to the Rams for 2019, and that's where he had his career arc at 11 and a half, but he's been bouncing around. He was in Dallas for 2 years. He was in Atlanta. He's in Washington now. He's got 9.5 sacks. So he might look for a semi-payday. But even though that 11.5 sacks wasn't in the first 3 years like it was for Kayvon Thibodeau, he still had an arc, right? In 2017, minus 3.5. Because you had 4 sacks in his rookie year, which is exactly what these two had. You had 8 sacks in 2017 when the team was good. I mean, the team was bad for the Giants. So he had 8 sacks, came out at 11. And now Dante Fowler, he did get traded in his 3rd year, 4 sacks, 2 between the Rams and the Jags, so 2-2. And then for Kayvon, it's at 3 right now. And that's in 15 games. Kayvon's in 10. So you could sit here and try to explain to me, oh, well, Kayvon got hurt. Again, that's a moot point. Absolute fucking moot point. Because you wouldn't have to trade for Brian Burns. So, leaning into my number one pick analysis, and of course the Aziz thing is its own separate entity, I'm telling you guys this right now. Now, we'll have further discussions about this, but I just wanted to peek this before we end off the show. The New York Giants have the number one overall pick right now. I've heard certain folks, it's a minority, but certain folks like say, the Giants should trade back and get a haul from number one. And I was considering not entertaining that idea on this show, but I feel like, possibilities are endless. So, here's my thing to that. Absolutely not. I understand this team has more holes than anything, right? This team has more holes, need assets, whatever. I don't remember the last time a team traded down from one. It's been a long time. Well, actually, no, it's not been a long time because we had that fucking last year with Bryce Young. No, 2 years ago. A year and a half ago with the 2023 draft. Fucking Bryce Young. Okay, we saw that. And obviously that got Frank Reich in a lot of hot water, even though the owner meddled. But my point is this. They didn't pick a quarterback this past draft. So you're forcing yourself, because you didn't like the quarterbacks, to pick a quarterback in this draft, which you have to do. In two separate avenues, by the way. You keep three, really. If you keep this regime, you keep Joe Schoen, or you get rid of both of them. And you have a new staff. Each of these three avenues requires you to draft a quarterback in the first round. Because if you keep Schoen and Dable, that gives you 2 to 3 more years to build a team. And you have to because you didn't pick a quarterback in this class. If you keep Schoen, you didn't pick a quarterback in this class, so you got to go get Shedeur Sanders or Cam Ward. And now if you bring in an entire new regime in, they want their own guy. They don't want to go out in free agency. They don't want to try this win now bullshit. Hopefully they are not influenced by John Mara about ticket sales and that shit. You bring Shedeur Sanders and have Malik Neighbors, that's an exciting team with no expectations. No one should be putting 10 wins, 9 wins, 8 wins on that team, but they'll fly under the radar. So here's my proposition. You want to talk about, you got to drop back from one, get assets, you got to go to 26. First of all, I am not for kicking this fucking can down the road. I'm not. And we may not end up with the number one overall pick. They could win 2 meaningless games or 1 meaningless game. But I am for, if you're at number one, you take the best player available and you also take a quarterback because I don't know that Travis Hunter's worth taking number one. There's also other guys that are not worth taking number one. So Shedeur Sanders. Right? Or Cam Ward, for example. But Shedeur Sanders is the more popular one, so we'll go with that. Look at trading guys who have expiring contracts. Look at trading Bobby Okereke. Because he's not a fit for this scheme. We see that. He's not a fit for the scheme, and he's getting older. So he had a Blake Martinez-esque arc. Trade him for maybe a 4th or a 5th round pick, whatever you could get. I would trade Kayvon Thibodeau, right? He's coming up on that 5th-year option. You really don't want to pay him $16 million. Go ahead and send him elsewhere. They don't have to decide, I believe, till May or late April what they want to do with him in terms of his 5th year. He's not worth it. So, you know what? Go out there and trade him for a 3rd or a 2nd or whatever the highest offer is that you can get. Looking at other players, I don't know about Jalen Hyatt. I don't know how much you're going to get there. Tight ends, you're not going to get shit. Defensive line, you're not going to get shit. I mean, unless you go the absolute radical route and trade Andrew Thomas or Dexter Lawrence, which I don't see happening. Mara would be pissed about that. But realistically, right? Looking at the players in this roster, that tells you how much of a problem Joe Schoen is as a general manager. Because I'm only counting 2 cornerstone players that are worth shit to other teams, that they're worth something to other teams. Kayvon Thibodeau, who could be a building piece, and you know what, if you trade for him, let's just say winning team trades for Kayvon Thibodeau, you're not having those same expectations because you know he was a failed 1st round pick. He was a failed 5th overall pick. Bobby Okereke, you're getting a solid linebacker. Via trade, it's a little bit more different than free agency. You have those expectations, depend on what you give up. So, it's a problem that the GM has done such a shitty job roster building that you either have to go completely radical or have only two guys you could sell off. Obviously, they didn't sell off Slayton or they didn't sell off Ojulari. So, and the approach should be different. It's like people are telling me, oh, well, he didn't let them trade them at the deadline. Well, the offseason's different, right? You bring in a Shedeur Sanders, you don't have to worry about, whether Kayvon Thibodeau and Bobby Okereke don't make a fucking difference of who's in the seats. They don't. If Kayvon Thibodeau was Aiden Hutchinson, different story. He's not. So trade him away for what you could get, and trade away Bobby Okereke for what you could get. That's a show. Like, comment, subscribe, turn on post notifications so you know when the live stream pops to drops. Share this out on the podcast platforms. Appreciate you guys. A lot of big picture stuff on this show today. I appreciate you guys for tuning in and sticking with me during the holidays. Obviously, again, hopefully you guys have a Merry Christmas, whatever else you celebrate. We'll be back on Saturday with a preview pod for the Colts game. Sunday night, we will be doing a live stream year-end. So if you want to call in or you want to stay in the chat, you're obviously welcome to. And Tuesday on New Year's Eve, we'll put out a recap pod for the Colts game. I appreciate you guys so much. We'll talk to you later.